If they buy their oil from Venezuela, they have to pay a 25% tariff to do business with the United States.
On top of existing tariffs, so for example, China.
Yes.
298.5%. That's not a stock market surge, it's the tax Canada slaps on American butter once it crosses their quota. Cheese? A crushing 245.5%. This isn't a trade war footnote, it's a chokehold on the US dairy industry. Billions in shipments are stalled, frozen, or dumped at fire sale prices. Canada's tariff rate quota, TRQ, sounds technical, but it's a brutal gatekeeper. A fixed amount of US dairy enters at low tariffs. Exceed that, and the hammer drops. 245.5% on cheese, 298.5% on butter. That's not a tariff, it's a financial guillotine. Shipments turn into losses faster than milk sours. Canada's supply management system is the fortress behind this. It caps domestic milk production, controls imports with quotas, and keeps prices high to shield local farmers. Fair enough, protect your own. But the US, with its scale-up export-driven dairy model, is getting squeezed. The USMCA, signed in 2020 to replace NAFTA, was supposed to open Canada's market. Instead, quotas are handed to Canadian retail giants, Loblaws, Metro, Sobeys, not US exporters with contracts and customers waiting. The US Dairy Export Council calls it discrimination dressed as policy, a middle finger to free trade promises. The fallout? Hundreds of tons of mozzarella, cheddar, and powdered milk are piling up in US cold storage. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Idaho. Companies freeze shipments to delay spoilage or dump them domestically at 30 to 40% below value just to break even. This floods the US market, crashing raw milk prices. Farmers take the first hit. A US Dairy Farmers Association survey from early 2025 shows 47% of mid-sized farms bleeding red. One Pennsylvania farm, 400 cows strong, saw income drop 28% as milk prices fell from $17 to $12 per 100 pounds. This isn't a hiccup, it's a supply chain implosion. The US Dairy Export Council pegs losses at $7 billion in 18 months. Direct hits, $3 billion, $1.2 billion from canceled exports, $800 million in storage and shipping costs, $1 billion in devalued goods. Indirect losses add $4 billion, plummeting milk prices, farm failures, job cuts in processing and transport. Canada insists it's playing by USMCA rules, but the US calls their quota game rigged. No WTO case yet, but tensions are a lit fuse. Trust between these allies is eroding faster than a block of cheddar in the sun. If this drags into 2026, the US dairy sector faces a death spiral. Exports to Canada, once the second largest market, could vanish. Not from lack of demand, but from quota lockouts. Family farms are on the brink, bankruptcies loom. The US tossed an $850 million aid package at the problem in May 2025, but that's a band-aid on a gunshot wound, covering less than 12% of losses. WTO complaints or USMCA renegotiations are options, but both are slow, messy, and politically toxic in an election year. Without a breakthrough, we're staring at a de facto trade divorce between neighbors. Quotas aren't evil, they can balance markets. But when they're weaponized as protectionism, they gut industries and torch trust. Canada's guarding its farmers fine, but breaking trade commitments under USMCA's umbrella isn't just a flex, it's a betrayal. The US, meanwhile, can't just preach free markets without teeth to enforce them. Relying on aid or trade courts won't cut it. Strategic moves, diplomatic pressure, financial leverage, new markets in Europe or Asia are the only way out. Otherwise, this $7 billion freeze-out becomes a case study in how protectionism can kneecap an ally's industry. Steel and aluminum. Tariffs ignite a firestorm July 11, 2025. The White House drops a 35% tariff bomb on Canadian steel and aluminum, effective August 1st. The pitch: protect U.S. economic security. Canada calls it blind protectionism, no justification, just muscle. Within 48 hours, Ottawa hits back. 50% tariffs on $22 billion of U.S. goods. Electric vehicle motors, Ford F-150 frames, core U.S. exports, take the brunt. This isn't tit for tat, it's a calculated escalation. Canada's response isn't just tariffs, it's a three-pronged gut punch. First, the 50% tariffs hit U.S. businesses like a freight train. Second, a $4.8 billion CAD Green Steel Fund modernizes Canadian mills. Dofasco and Hamilton get $1.8 billion to switch to electric arc furnaces, cutting CO2 by 60% by 2030. Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie scores $450 million for clean hydrogen tech. Third, new laws mandate domestic steel for federal projects, locking out US and Chinese imports. Canada's playing chess while the US swings a hammer. The impact? Immediate. US prices for EV motors jump 12%. Aluminum rolls for cans hit $3,500 per ton, a 3-year high. Midwest cold-rolled steel for trucks and EVs climb $60 per ton to $1,060. The Midwest aluminum premium spikes 54% to 58 cents per pound with forecasts of 70 cents if talks collapse. A 15-gram aluminum can's cost ripples through retail. Beer prices could climb double digits. Modelo and Budweiser are already slashing summer deals. Inflation, already a 2025 election flashpoint, gets fresh fuel. The US auto industry's taking a beating. Ford says new labor contracts add $850 per vehicle. Tariffs could push that to $8,000 for an F-150. That's a $45,000 truck ballooning to $53,000. Brutal for Midwest buyers in swing states. J.D. Power says automakers can only pass on 30% of costs without tanking sales. Anderson Economic Group estimates a $30 billion annual hit to U.S. consumers from steel and aluminum tariffs alone. Canada's steel exports, 6.5 million tons to the U.S., worth $7.3 billion CAD, are now uneconomical. Bank of Montreal predicts a 3 million ton drop in 2025, offset by 2.5 million tons of domestic demand from wind farms and green transit. U.S. mills see price surges, but assembly lines in Detroit face shift cuts. Michigan's Auto Workers Union warns of rising costs. Canada's United Steelworkers report 200 layoffs at Algoma Steel. Both sides bleed. This didn't start in 2025. U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel began in 2022, triggering a 10% job cut in Canada's steel sector by 2023. Ottawa didn't flinch then, investing $1.2 billion CAD to modernize furnaces and pivot to domestic projects like BC's wind farms. Bloomberg's metal index shows cold-rolled steel up 9% in 2 weeks after Canada tightened exports. A Ford Bronco's production cost rises $1,800, painful for an industry on thin margins. The U.S. protects its steel but risks its auto sector where jobs dwarf mill employment. Factories in Flint and Toledo rotate shifts. Indiana pauses expansion. Canada's Hamilton furnaces hum, feeding domestic projects. By 2026, Canada's Ministry of Energy projects 2 million tons of new domestic steel demand, nearly offsetting export losses. The U.S. meanwhile faces a choice: double down on tariffs or negotiate. Neither side's backing off, and the clock's ticking. June 30, 2025. Canada makes history, shipping its first LNG cargo to South Korea from Kitimat, British Columbia. The Gaslog Glasgow cuts through the Pacific, shaving transit time from 20 days to 10, bypassing U.S. pipelines and the Panama Canal. This isn't just a shipment, it's Canada breaking free from decades of U.S. energy dominance. The $40 billion CAD LNG Canada project, backed by Shell, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and Kogas, is a geopolitical power play. It's Canada planting a flag in Asia's booming energy market, sidestepping U.S. tariffs and leveraging the CPTPP to cement its Indo-Pacific role. The numbers are stark. Canada's LNG, priced at $1.10 per MMBTU, undercuts the U.S. Henry Hub at $3.75. Direct shipping avoids U.S. transit fees and a 10% tariff slapped on Canadian gas. Japan wants 20 million more tons annually by 2026. South Korea is expanding storage by 50%. Before, 95% of Canada's gas exports funneled through the U.S., sold cheap and vulnerable to tariffs. Now, Asia's open market gives Ottawa leverage: higher prices, long-term contracts, and less reliance on a tariff-happy neighbor. The Kitimat project, with 14 million tons of capacity, is set to hit full stride by August 2025. Phase 2, doubling to 28 million tons, looms as a warning to competitors like the US, Australia, and Qatar. But it's not all smooth sailing. The IEA and IISD warn Canada's rapid LNG expansion risks its greenhouse gas commitments. Pipelines in northern BC cost more than US Gulf Coast setups, and carbon fees bite. Still, Kitimat's humming, thousands of jobs, a $5.8 billion CAD deal with indigenous communities like Haisla, who hold equity. The government expects $23 billion in revenue, even with tax breaks. Mark Carney, ex-Bank of England governor, pushes for licensing reforms to speed up projects, framing this as Canada's economic pivot. The US? left scrambling to rethink its energy import strategy as Canada's Pacific gamble pays off. July 8, 2025. President Trump drops a bombshell, a 200% tariff on imported pharmaceuticals effective August 1st. The ultimatum: move production to the US within 18 months or lose the world's biggest market. This isn't just trade leverage, it's a direct hit on the supply chain for insulin, biologics, and cancer drugs. The American Hospital Association warns of shortages by Q1 2026. U.S. healthcare costs could spike 15 to 25% by Q4 2025 per the Department of Health. Elderly patients already stretched face the brunt. The math is grim. China and India supply 80 to 90% of active pharmaceutical ingredients. A 200% tariff could inflate drug prices 6 to 8 times post-border. Australia, a top 5 U.S. pharma supplier with $2 billion in exports like CSL's plasma and vaccines, faces a dilemma. Its pharmaceutical benefits scheme caps drug prices, and Finance Minister Jim Chalmers vows no concessions despite U.S. pressure. Australia's prepping a domestic support package and eyeing Asian markets, a rare rift with a key ally. Canada's playing a quieter game. Ottawa dodged Trump's tariff threat letter in July, securing bilateral talks for a waiver before August 1st. But Prime Minister Mark Carney draws a hard line. No deal will sacrifice affordable medicine access. Canada's activated a strategic reserve for 200 critical drugs, antibiotics, insulin, biologics, and pumped $1.2 billion CAD into domestic pharma to brace for U.S. supply chain chaos. Carney, leveraging his Bank of England cred, projects calm while making Trump's tariff bluff a political liability. Canada's not caving, it's buying time. Trump's tariff net widens beyond pharma. Japan and South Korea face 25% tariffs on all exports starting August 1st, with threats of hikes or cuts based on relationships. Investors call it diplomatic blackmail, effective for steel but riskier for drugs. Bloomberg warns this isn't just trade tactics, it's strategic chaos. U.S. hospitals brace for cost surges, consumers face higher bills. The ripple effect could tank trust in global supply chains. The bigger picture, trust on the brink. This isn't just about dairy, steel, LNG, or pharma, it's a slow-motion fracture of North American trade. The USMCA, meant to unify, is a battleground. Canada's quota games and retaliatory tariffs aren't impulsive. They're calculated, long-term plays to shield domestic interests while exploiting U.S. vulnerabilities. The U.S., swinging tariffs like a club, risks alienating allies and strangling its own industries. Auto plants, farms, and hospitals aren't abstract. They're jobs, livelihoods, lives. The U.S. needs more than aid packages or WTO complaints. It needs a strategy, diplomacy with teeth, new markets, less reliance on neighbors playing hardball. Canada's LNG pivot to Asia shows the path: diversify or die. But Canada's not blameless. Quotas and tariffs dressed as protectionism violate the spirit of trade deals. Both sides are digging in, and the cost is trust, between allies and markets and systems built over decades. By 2026, the damage could be permanent. U.S. dairy exports to Canada may collapse. Steel and auto jobs could hemorrhage. Drug prices could soar, hitting the vulnerable hardest. The question isn't just about trade tools, it's about will. Can the U.S. wield political and legal leverage to secure its export rights? Will Canada face global pressure to reform its quotas? And if this drags on, who pays? Farmers, workers, patients, or the very idea of allied trade? The clock's ticking, and the stakes are higher than tariffs.